on.
With some creativity and expert piloting, this thing can quickly become a Special Forces shuttle. What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is all about the Edda-class shuttle. We'll get into all the interesting ways this ship was utilized during the Clone Wars, talk about the executive variant, and we'll do a full breakdown of its stats and behind-the-scenes facts. The Edda-class was manufactured by Cygnus Spaceworks, the same company that made the Nu, Theta, and Lambda, really locking down the shuttle market for a couple decades. And this was mostly due to their low cost and high performance. At 100,000 credits, it was about a third of the cost of the Lambda, but surprisingly, it was more expensive than the Nu class. What is also odd is that its top atmospheric speed is only 750 km per hour, or 466 miles per hour, making it slower than the bulkier Nu class that often carried cargo. So perhaps that's just stock, and many of these are modded by the Jedi Order, because in space, the Edda class is known for racing through CIS defenses, and even when we see it in atmosphere, it can still zip around with ease. Its Class 2 hyperdrive is average for these types of craft, slower than many fighters in the Venator, but quicker than your average consumer freighter. It is not shielded, a risky choice to make it one of your go-to shuttles for the Jedi Order. I guess no better force field than trusting in the Force itself. Its armament is 3 light laser cannons, which is great for just fending off fighters and interceptors while it tries to escape, as it really shouldn't be initiating any dogfights. Instead, the Republic and Jedi Order mainly use these as a standard transport, carrying up to 10 passengers at a time in this spacious cabin area, while also bringing along a complement of 2 Undakar-class jump speeders, very compact, foldable speeder bikes. All of that is why it also made an excellent Special Forces shuttle. It could quickly get across a planet, or weave through CIS fleets, actually set down on a separatist ship or space station, and lock into place via its magnetic landing gear. If in space, there was plenty of storage room in the Edda class for the gear needed for a spacewalk. And while on-world, these 2 compact speeder bikes could be used by troopers or Jedi to scout ahead. We saw this method used to get behind the enemy lines during the Battle of Ringo Vinda and the rescue of Eeth Koth. With the latter example, we can see that with the right pilot, you could come out of hyperspace just before the CIS fleet, and the craft was quick and nimble enough to be flown closely along whatever capital ship was your target, allowing you to evade detection by sensor arrays. And we see more of this ship's maneuverability when a C-70 was destroyed as a Jedi escape, nearly taking out the Edda class with it. Another excellent feature is the folding wings and fine-tuned repulsor system. At a length of 14.2 meters or 47 feet, it was 2 Wookiees shorter than the Nu class, and about 9 meters shorter than the Y-wing. With its wings open, it had a height of 21 meters or 69 feet, making it about 2 Wookiees taller than the Nu, and about a Jawa shorter than the AT-AT. And at 26 meters or 86 feet wide, it is more than 3 Wookiees wider than the ARC-170. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be taller than a 6-story building, longer than a school bus, and wider than 7 lanes of traffic. Keep in mind that like the V-19 Torrent Starfighter, it isn't like those dimensions are all filled in. It isn't that big a target. And with the pilot's ability to maneuver these wings while in flight, it creates some annoying variation for the CIS targeting computers. But primarily, this wing folding feature was designed to take up less space in the hangar bay, allowing for hundreds of ships total, including starfighters, bombers, and many shuttles inside of a single Venator. With just that one level hangar, you would prefer your ships to take up more vertical space than horizontal, which is why so many ships like the Edda, Nu, and V-19 have this wing folding feature, while it also had incredibly fine-tuned series of repulsor lifts, giving it this ability to make these sharp but smooth turns and set down in these hectic warship hangars, and also on busy planet-side landing pads. As for its history, before the war broke out, these were known to transport senators and other Republic VIPs, but it was used so much by the Jedi during the Clone Wars that both Cad Bane and Darth Maul instantly know that Jedi have arrived when they see the distinct tri-wing shuttle set down.
Jedi, brother! You found us!
And speaking of Maul, just a quick nod to his incredible strength in the Force. We see that he can single-handedly force pull an Edda off a cliff. One of these shuttles would take Ahsoka to Mandalore during her mission to help stem corruption, and it later took her, Kenobi, and Anakin to a different plane of existence. Without them knowing, when they were brought to the mysterious Force world of Mortis, they popped out of the normal galaxy.
Sir, we are at the rendezvous point, and there's no sign of you in our scanners.
They don't know who or how they landed the Edda class in this double pyramid-shaped object, but the shuttle would become their home base here. We see that the maintenance area is located right under the floor panels in the passenger section, and allows for comfortable access to most major systems like the hyperdrive, engines, and computer systems. And another neat feature is that the co-pilot can completely take over the controls, with Obi-Wan swerving the shuttle away from a tower when Anakin was pursuing a target a little too closely for Kenobi's tastes. and later we would see that this was one of Palpatine's preferred methods of travel.
Prepare my ship.
Darth Sidious arrives on Mandalore on a variant of the Edda class called the Republic Executive Shuttle. It is said to have many upgrades, the details of which are still classified, but we can make out some differences in the cockpit bulb, while the main body appears to be bulkier. This most likely points to powerful engines and larger Tibanacast reserves for these larger and likely stronger laser cannons, coming up from light laser cannons to medium or even heavy. The placement of the weapons on these wings, as well as the general shape of the wings, are also slightly different. And though more rare, we do see one of these Republic Executive Shuttles with the fleet over Ring Govinda. And we learned that your standard Edda class was great for search and rescue, as well as some stealthy operations behind enemy lines, with Anakin, Rex, and Fives using it to both search the wreckage of Tup's transport, before it covertly delivers them to the underside of the planetary ring, allowing for a spacewalk to the CIS-held hangar bay. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The Edda class was brought to life in the Clone Wars via inspiration from the original concept art for the Lambda class, which was created by Joe Johnston for Return of the Jedi. Its first appearance was in the episode Grievous Intrigue, Season 2, Episode 9, and has been expanded upon in the Legend sourcebook Endless Vigil, and the canon sourcebook Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles. But most important of all, remember, don't judge a shuttle by its speed stats, and the Force will be with you, always. These things are proof that you can have great action scenes that are guided by the lore, not breaking it. What's up, Meta Nerds? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the All-Terrain Armored Cargo Transport, or the AT-ACT. We will do a complete breakdown of its stats, see how it was used on multiple planets, and end with some behind-the-scenes facts. The AT-ACT was produced by Kuat Drive Yards, the company that produced almost all of the walkers for the Republic and Empire. Though technically not for sale, word on the HoloNet is that these run the Empire about $125k a piece, just over twice the cost of a TIE fighter. At a glance, the AT-ACT looks like it's just a simple variant of the AT-AT, but it actually has some really big design differences. For starters, you got the size. The cargo transport had a height of 31.85 meters or 104 feet, making it about as tall as an AT-AT with an AT-ST standing on top. And at 34.9 meters or 115 feet long, it was 14 meters longer than the standard AT-AT, being more than an entire X-Wing longer, space that was all used for this large cargo bay. This area was able to carry up to 550 cubic meters of cargo, which could hold a total weight of 5,000 metric tons, about equal to the weight of 6,135 dewbacks. If it showed up here on Earth, it would stand taller than a 10-story building, be about half the length of a 747, have the cargo space of 16 20-foot shipping containers, and haul more cargo than you could fit on the backs of 46,000 horses. They had these specifically designed cargo pods that were used for transport, which had this distinctive orange coloring, a modular system that allowed these pods to be picked up by other ships and vehicles. And we can even see that they were designed to be taken off with this conveying system. This additional height did provide for a longer stride, but came at the cost of structural stability. U-Wings at the Battle of Scarif were able to exploit this weakness and bring the whole thing crashing down with a single mounted Roba M45 heavy repeating ion cannon. Whereas on Hoth, we saw that the more powerful P-Tower laser cannons proved ineffective on a standard AT-AT. So how is this possible? Well, it is due to a very important difference in the design of this cargo walker. To provide extra power to move this enormous cargo, the AT-ACT has stronger engines, which is simple enough, but to help with the fact that all of this new weight is set on top of longer legs, the load would be supported by an electromagnetic tensor field. A tensor field essentially nullifies the weight of gravity on objects, making them a whole lot easier to transport. Tensor fields aren't often mentioned in Star Wars lore as much as other types of technology, but you have seen them used before. Some examples of other ships with tensor fields are the C-9979 landing craft, which would generate them in their wings, in order to prevent them from sagging under the extreme weight of all the AATs. And a tensor field failing was the culprit of the invisible hand breaking in half during the Battle of Coruscant, as the ship simply couldn't handle the gravitational pull without one. And with the AT-ACT, we see that the tensor field generators are in the knee, right where the gunner is aiming. With all those ion shots on target, the complete weight of the walker is now bearing down on this single leg. The full, non-nullified load proves too much, and so we don't see it exploding in a ball of flames, but buckling and snapping from supporting too much extra weight. A cool little detail that shows how action can be logically guided by well-written lore, not just dismissed in favor of action scenes, which is so often the case when it comes to things like shields, where we simply have to say that the plot willed it. Its large cargo hold was monitored by stevedore droids, which we unfortunately don't have a current visual of them, but they would help to divide the loads on the walker to make trips more manageable. as some of these experimental materials are described as ultra-dense. And some other interesting things to point out is that the red glow is from an infrared force field generated in the cockpit. The air filters for the vehicle are located right behind the head on the main body, and these walkers use the same solid fuel slugs like we saw in the AT-AT. On board the ACT, you would have a crew of 2 and space for up to 10 passengers, which is 20 less than the AT-AT. Because of its cargo role, overall it had much less armor, but the section just over the cargo container is reinforced. And despite not being intended for assault, it could still defend Imperial assets, coming with 2 Taemin-back MS-2 heavy laser cannons, which would be able to blow apart enemy infantry and easily punch a hole in any attacking ground vehicles. The first time we see the AT-ACT in use is during the numerous construction attempts of Fortress Vader on Mustafar. The Sith Lord consulted an ancient Sith ghost known as Momin to help in the construction of a building that would focus darkside energy. The design of the fortress would start off being rather different from the final version that we would see, with each of its predecessors having a very unlucky history, each being destroyed in some unforeseen way. This would happen 8 times, with the 9th building being the one we see in Rogue One. Due to the harsh nature of Mustafar, Vader would use AT-ACTs and OICTs to build each of the different versions. These would be very useful in safely transporting building materials across the hazardous hellscape. Not only would the lava be dangerous to typical vehicles, but on several occasions, the troops and vehicles stationed at the construction site would be attacked by the local Mustafarians, who weren't too thrilled with a Dark Lord of the Sith plotting his castle right on their home. On one occasion, 3 Force-sensitive Mustafarians would use their power in an attempt to flood the castle with lava, killing off almost all of the Imperial troops and destroying most of the vehicles. Vader would be able to survive the attack by using the wreckage of an AT-ACT that had been swept up by the lava. And so Vader has this vehicle to thank for him not losing any more limbs to the fires of Mustafar. The next time we would see this walker would be on the tropical paradise world of Scarif. Here, the AT-ACTs were used to transport heavy cargo and materials across the shallow waters surrounding the Citadel, a highly secretive research base as well as an archive for the Galactic Empire. In the Year Zero BBY, the Rebel Alliance would mount an attack on the Citadel in a gambit to gain access to the Death Star plans. The Rebels would infiltrate the compound using a stolen Zeta class, and a ground battle would ensue. The Rebels would then come under intense fire from at least 4 AT-ACTs. This would turn the tide in the Empire's favor, but the victory was cut short when several Rebel starfighters would get past the shield ring. These starfighters easily destroyed all the walkers, paving a clear way for the Rebels to the Citadel. This battle showcased that when against something light like infantry, it was able to defend itself from small arms fire, and even take a rocket directly to the head, just shrugging it off. But due to its overall lack of armor, it is at a heavy disadvantage to purpose-made starfighters. The X-Wings having more firepower than most starfighters, and packed a way bigger punch than the T-47 airspeeders on Hoth. These could also be seen on the shipyards of Kuat Drive Yards, transporting materials for building the weapons and ships used by the Empire. Like its use on Scarif, these wouldn't see any action until the facility came under attack. 5 years after the Battle of Yavin, the New Republic launched a bombing campaign against the shipyard ring, in an effort to cut off the Imperial remnants supplied to arms and armor. KDY would be forced to use any available assets they had to fend off the New Republic starships. AT-ATs, AT-STs, AT-ACTs, and even the remaining AT-TEs would be used in the defense of these shipyards. But they would not be able to keep the New Republic at bay, and Imperial forces eventually surrendered. And some of these also saw service on the Wookiee home planet of Kashyyyk, where they were used to transport building materials for new Imperial bases, and even transport some Wookiee slaves. After the fall of the Empire and 5 ABY at the Battle of Jakku, Imperial forces on the various worlds across the Empire would surrender and leave. One AT-ACT would be left behind on the Wookiee homeworld, where it would slowly deteriorate and be covered by the natural environment. By 7 ABY, this AT-ACT would be almost completely covered in vegetation, and Han Solo would come across this walker during one of his trips to Kashyyyk. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. It first appeared in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and the tale of it being used on Mustafar comes from the Darth Vader comic series, issues 23 and 24. The stories of them on Kuat came from Star Wars Insider, and Han Solo finds one on Kashyyyk in the novel Last Shot. And it should be noted that the AT-ACT has some potential inconsistencies across various sources. For starters, it's said that it has longer legs to give it a faster stride over the normal AT-AT, but its top speed is 50 km per hour, or 31 miles per hour. Whereas the AT-AT tops out at 60 km per hour, or 37 miles per hour. Perhaps its speed is much quicker than it would have been if it had all that cargo on those smaller legs, but it's still incredibly slow. As many fans have pointed out, something like the Juggernaut seems like it would have fit all of the Empire's goals while still being a lot quicker. And since its wheels are actually spinning metal discs, not rubber, it would have done fine on Mustafar too. Probably better in the marshes of Kashyyyk and the sands of Scarif. Another possible inconsistency is that with the pilots of the AT-ACT. The visual dictionary for Rogue One states that any qualified driver of the Empire could pilot the AT-ACT, and that they had no specified pilot corps. But they get this completely different look and helmet, and so if not a separate corps, they definitely went by the title of AT-ACT pilot. And just before we end, a little shout out to the OICT mentioned earlier. Currently, there is almost no information regarding it, aside from its appearance in the Darth Vader comic and a small on-screen appearance in Solo. There's just no stats or history on it. Funny enough, not even what the acronym stands for. The C in CT probably stands for crane or just cargo. But most important of all, remember, these walkers used to strike fear into the rebels, until they took an ion cannon to the knee. And the Force will be with you, always.
The cavalry has arrived!
What's up, Meta Nerds? The Clone Wars is back. My first viewing of the episode was great. And Clone Wars fans know this Bad Batch arc from watching the unfinished episodes years ago, but it was still great to see everything finalized. One of the most impressive things was the animation and action, which really matched the firepower of Bad Batch. We'll do a full breakdown of the unique arms, armor, and tactics of Clone Force 99, as there are a ton of blink and you'll miss it details in these action scenes. But first I want to thank this video's sponsor, the Star Wars Card Trader app by Topps. With the Clone Wars Season 7 coming back, it's a great time to jump in, because they just rolled out some limited edition cards like the Clone Wars Signature Series, and there's a ton of great Clone Wars era cards. Having just started, I was able to get a bunch of packs in a couple minutes, and got cards from all kinds of eras in different shows and movies. You can buy crystals to get packs quicker, but what's great is that with things like lock-on, daily awards, and cargo drops, you can add to your collection throughout the day. You can see in my collection I already have some cool ship cards, some of my favorite droids, and a nice detailed card of Big Palpy himself. The beauty of it being digital cards is that you're able to trade with people across the world. When you get duplicates or cards you're just not that crazy about, you can trade them to others. Currently, I'm trading all of these cards for a single vintage Tarkin card. If you want to start collecting and trading with me, just search Meta Nerds in the app. It's free to download, so go sign up and start building your collection by clicking on the link in the description. But let's go back to Anaxis, where the most infamous and effective clone unit is arriving.
I've heard mixed things about these guys. They have a 100% success rate.
Towards the end of the war, the Kaminoans' goal of eugenic perfection transitions into more deliberate mutation. Something we talk about in our extensive Clone Wars documentary if you want to check that out. And I do have to pause and respect 99, the defective clone reject that died a true hero of the Republic, and whom these mutated clones are named after. Each of them having highly specialized biological traits that are paired with specialized weaponry. And keep in mind that what makes them so impressive is that they all synergize, whether operating in fully offensive tactics like Shockwave, or when being more stealthy. So let's start with the leader, Hunter. The cloners genetically modified him to have a greater range of hearing, more visual acuity, and an incredibly sensitive olfactory system that allowed him to sniff out droids. Smelling a machine might sound odd at first, but the materials, shielding interacting with the atmosphere, Tabana gas variants, and types of fuel used for their ships and vehicles would all have distinct smells, and worked in concert with his ability to detect strong fluctuations in electromagnetic emissions across many kilometers. Defense droids buried underground, or the location of hidden shield generators would all be detectable via Hunter's genetic modification. He was also incredibly agile and trained for stealth, which led to him carrying a single DC-17 blaster pistol and vibroblade, while also picking up droid blasters along the way. This dual pistol style is used famously by Rex, but the quick and efficient movements with the blade is really impressive in the hands of Hunter. He can even take out dwarf spiders with ease, or disable numerous T-Series tactical droids with a few moves, deliberately not destroying their head casing, which can be used later by Republic intel. And all these weapons were quick to present, with the vibroblade storing away in his wrist comm system. Each member of Bad Batch has these devices that differ from your standard clone trooper, but the most impressive technology is in the hands of the aptly named Tech. His genetic modifications increased his critical thinking, memory, and visual spatial awareness at the expense of aggression and physical prowess. He's incredibly focused on his tasks. We see that after battles, he goes right to calibrating his wrist comms or hopping on the CIS computer systems, while the other clones are often still celebrating. While normal clones needed a balance of aggression and intellect, Tech was able to take the intelligence of the clone template to new limits, and like his brothers, was perfectly paired with his equipment. His armor is heavily modified from that of a scout trooper, with the addition of several antennae on the helmet and backpack that are pouring information into this datapad. The helmet also has these noise amplifiers, the Leia bun-like attachments that we've seen on the clone operators of the stealth ship, and during the Second Battle of Geonosis. With all this info going to the visor, it gives him an augmented reality view of the battlefront. Through this genetically gifted mind in the computer system, he's able to provide ideal trajectory for weaponry, like we see with the ion grenades. He would also carry dual DC-17s, but would be the one to duck out of combat to provide data to the more effective killers. But that's not to say he couldn't shoot, as we see him dropping plenty of clankers when the time is right. It should also be noted that when moving through fire, Tech always stays well protected in the middle of the squad. If you rewatch this episode, you'll see that the creators really paid attention to these small details. It's just cool to see this being kept consistent throughout. He also has many pouches full of hardware for every occasion, allowing him to slice into doors and computer systems or read other data cards. And we see that when slicing code, he can set up his datapad to be providing a constant scan of the surroundings by picking up on the droid's EM signature. Now the closest to Tech would be Crosshair, the team's sniper. Fittingly, we see that his helmet also has an extra antenna, and this similar augmented reality visor. With Tech providing invaluable data on CIS troop locations, and some computerized targeting assistance, he could get headshots from 10 clicks or about 6 miles away. The rifle he used was a 7.73 Fire Puncher, known for incredible accuracy, but also gets its name from the wide beam burning mode that could melt through multiple targets at once. More than a decade later, this same Merson munitions creation would be a favorite of criminal organizations, seen in the hands of the thugs under the employ of Vizago and Az Morgan. Again, with the incredible detail here, if you look close you can see that the normal helmet visor is cut out on the upper right edge to allow better aiming through the scope. His genetic modifications made him incredibly well coordinated and unmoved by battlefront stress or muscle fatigue, all allowing him to stay steady and rapidly pick off battle droids. Ironically, this kind of affect and mechanical efficiency is normally only seen in droids. His backpack likely has supplies and ammo like the others, but it's cool to see its weapon rack system. But perhaps when we see the drop-down visor showing the CIS vehicle identification outline, it is also displaying the access code to hijack it. Having the droids relay a code to their vehicles seems like a good way to access them, so this may be able to intercept or decipher the code used by these B1s, because once he enters, he does type something in. But from the techie and the far-off sniper, we gotta talk about the powerful brute. Wrecker was genetically modified for sheer power. He is a bit taller and a whole lot wider, being modified to grow denser bones and pack on more muscle. His strength is far superior to your standard clone and even many droids, allowing him to lift up an entire LA-AT gunship by himself. And later he even kicks open a blast door, much to Tech's annoyance. His weapon of choice is the Republic Commando Rifle, aka the DC-17M interchangeable weapon system. In Legends, this weapon was modular and could be changed into a sniper or grenade launcher, the latter really being something I could see Wrecker using. He also has a vibro weapon sidearm, but it's much larger than your average blade, perhaps best described as a vibro machete. His power made things like the shockwave maneuver possible, which really shows off how this bad batch of clones all harmonize perfectly, earning them the envious 100% success rate. Likely the only clone unit that could say that. As for behind the scenes facts, their armor is inspired by the clone commandos, and with their Battlefront 2 edition, the amazing mod community has made some skins of Bad Batch that look awesome. I thought it funny that this production note shows that Wrecker's DC-17 was scaled up by 15%. I'm thinking because it would be comically small on his gargantuan frame. George Lucas wanted Bad Batch to be a sort of clone version of the Dirty Dozen, and Filoni says that he based Wrecker on the Hulk. Crosshair was inspired by Clint Eastwood, with toothpick instead of iconic cigar. And he says that Hunter was based on Billy Soul from the Predator movie, but he also gives off some Rambo vibes. I guess Tech is just your generic tech guy. I imagine there will be a ton of cool little details in the next couple episodes of this Bad Batch arc, but hopefully this gave you some nice background knowledge for the next ones, and some things to catch when rewatching this episode. But most important of all, remember, the season has only just begun, and the Force will be with you, always. What's up, Meta Nerds? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the DSD-1 Dwarf Spider Droid. We'll do a full breakdown of its terrifying ability, see why those in the mining profession worried that this thing would pop up out of the ground and kill them, learn how it worked and the many ways that it was used by the CIS during the Clone Wars, as well as look at some variants and behind-the-scenes facts. The Dwarf Spider Droid is built by Bactoid Armor Workshop, the same people that would produce the majority of the weapons, vehicles, and droids of the CIS. It would stand at a height of 1.98 meters or 6.5 feet tall, not including this large antenna, being only a few centimeters taller than a B-1 battle droid. At a width of 3.05 meters or 10 feet, it was about 1.5 B-1 battle droids across. And with a mass of 337 kilograms, it weighed more than 5 B-1s. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be just taller than an F-150 truck, wider than a school bus, and weighed nearly as much as 2,000 Goliath bird eater spiders. The Dwarf Spider droid consists of a turret-like head with multiple infrared photoreceptors and scanners. Things like the ARC Trooper's Stealth Walker might have been able to cloak their EM signature and invade these infrared scanners, but the droid also has a pair of echolocation emitters. Sound wave data cross-referenced with the IR data might have been able to detect any anomalies via cloaking or jamming tech. The DSD-1 was colloquially known as the Burrowing Spider droid, because of its terrifying ability to dig after its opponents. More on how that was used to break up the mining guild strikers in a bit. The droid used 4 spider-like legs for locomotion. These legs would help in movement and provide a stable platform when aiming, and even allowed it to scale some steep terrain. The Dwarf Spider droids would have masculine programming, but it wouldn't communicate via Galactic Basic, instead using a sort of binary, speaking via a series of beeps, not actual words like we hear with some battle droids and even stuff like the HMP droid gunship. The main armament of the Dwarf Spider droid would be a single heavy blaster cannon. This gun would be versatile and work against a variety of targets. Its anti-personnel firing mode would easily take out clones or enemies from afar. Its secondary firing mode would be much slower but more powerful, easily blowing through light vehicles like the AT-RT, though it did only put dents in larger Republic vehicles like the AT-TE. But it would even be able to shoot down aircraft. By dropping those back legs and giving it enough of a firing arc, we see that it had enough elevation to hit stuff like the clone gunship used by Rex, Cody, and Bad Batch on an axis. The rotation speed of the head was rather slow, and so it wouldn't be able to fight faster targets. Another flaw was that the length of the blaster cannon barrel would sometimes prevent it from turning or even maneuvering in tight spaces. The underside of the DSD was also a weak spot for explosives, but as a final attack it could initiate self-destruct, causing its generator to violently explode, vaporizing the DSD, and anyone unfortunate enough to be around it when it happened. Though sometimes this could happen from incoming attacks, which would also set off the generator and sometimes damage nearby CIS assets. Though as Wrecker shows us, if you can also block the barrel right as it fires, the attack will destroy itself without initiating the self-destruct feature. And the vibro knife carried by Hunter seems to discharge some disabling electric energy, so when stabbed through the photoreceptor, it would travel to the droid brain and shut it down. As for its history, it is actually quite the Outer Rim corporate dystopian nightmare. The DSD-1 would first be operated by the Commerce Guild in the years before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. The Commerce Guild would operate many mining operations across the galaxy, and on several occasions, these miners would try to revolt. To counter this, the Commerce Guild would deploy the DSDs to enter the mines and convince everyone to get back to work. After this, it would be used in conjunction with its big brother, the OG-9 Spider droid, to pay a visit to those who were trying to evade paying the Commerce Guild. Right before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, Commerce Guild would join the Confederacy of Independent Systems and provide it with their battle droids and vehicles, with these 2 Spider droids being a main addition to the CIS vast droid collection. The DSD would first see operations during the very outbreak of the Clone Wars and the earliest moments of the Battle of Geonosis in 22 BBY. Before the Colosseum and the main battle erupted, several DSDs were protecting multiple anti-orbital guns surrounding the Geonosian arena, and these large guns would protect the planet from capital ships in orbit. These guns and the Spider droids defending them would be destroyed by Mace Windu and Luminara Unduli, with the assistance of some TX-130 Saber tanks. Now that the clones and the rest of the Jedi could arrive on the planet, the DSDs would soon face the Republic in full force. On Geonosis, the DSDs proved their worth and were able to pick up clone troopers from many kilometers. Not only were they killing clones, but they were also helpful in pinpointing specific targets. The big antenna was relaying enemy positions and data back to command, and they would help their big brothers the OG-9s in a specific tactic. The DSDs would race out and scout ahead, but as soon as a bigger threat or overwhelming force would appear, calling in the OG-9 with its laser that could just cut through ranks of troopers, and the big gun that could punch holes in things like the AT-TE. After Geonosis, the DSD would be operating on numerous separatist-controlled worlds for a variety of different purposes. In most cases, they were on the front lines with many other battle droids used by the CIS. It would be present at major battles such as Christophsis, Malastare, and many others. On Malastare, the DSDs would be lethal to the Dug mounted troops, wiping out all but one of them before they could reach the droids, only to be shot dead as he attempted to destroy them up close and personal. And in Legends, we know of their use on Munilinst, Dantooine, and Thule, just to name a few. And the Separatists would also use the DSDs on defense. On Teth, they were stationed here to defend against the AT-TEs on an almost vertical cliff. Having the high ground, the spiders had an incredible advantage, and could fire on the ATTE's feet, disabling their legs and causing them to fall to their doom. Another time we see them defending the Separatist prison complex, the Citadel, on the planet Lola Seyu. But the commander of the base, O.C. Sobek, seems to prefer the similar LM-432 crab droid over the Dwarf spider droid, as we only see 2 DSDs way off in the background, compared to the dozens if not hundreds of crab droids used on this base. Quite the opposite can be said for the Separatist base on Felucia, where a ton of DSDs are stationed to defend this base, as well as patrolling the surrounding forests. And it would also return to its roots as an anti-riot unit in service with the CIS on Reluctant Worlds. Onderon was one such world, but the Onderon rebels were able to use guerrilla warfare style tactics, and were able to best many of the Dwarf spiders. Throughout the war, several variants of the DSD would be made. The first is the amphibious version developed for the swamplands, marshes, and other wet environments, and could actually operate underwater. This type's blaster cannon seems to be bigger than the normal version, although whether if this is because it is a stronger gun or just something to do with it being able to operate underwater is unknown. This type was used during the later stages of the Battle of Kashyyyk against the Republic and the native Wookiees. These last 2 variants are now legends, but they are some of the coolest ones. There was the heavy Dwarf spider droid, which now had 3 of those heavy blaster cannons. It also had some sort of apparatus on its back, which we don't know exactly what it was, but it was most likely some sort of upgraded power generator to support the additional firepower. This type saw use at the Battle of Geonosis, where it was extremely effective against infantry. The last type was the Advanced Dwarf Spider Droid, or ADSD. This type was heavily redesigned and included many more enhancements. Additional armor plating on its legs, a top-mounted turret with explosive blaster rounds, and an ability to fight in complete darkness, along with linked missile launchers, made this a much deadlier version over your standard DSD. The Clone Commando Delta Squad would face this type on numerous occasions, and Captain Rex even faced one of these as well. And believe it or not, the ADSD was actually available before the Clone Wars, where it was also used in the same anti-riot duty, but of course more reserved when those rioters acquired some heavy ordnance. When the time came to join the CIS, the ADSD was also added, but sparingly due to its high costs. When the time came for the Clone Wars to end with the execution of Order 66, all of the droids used by the CIS would be ordered to shut down. This is true in canon at least, but the DSD has a special story in Legends. Initially, they were shut down like the rest, but a few years into the Imperial era, the Empire began recommissioning the DSDs into Imperial service, and they were first put to use against their former masters, with the Imperials sicking them on newly captured Separatist worlds. While other DSDs were sent to many training centers across the galaxy, allowing many stormtroopers to train against this Clone Wars terror, while others almost became a sort of Imperial attack dog, where they would be used in stormtrooper squads to be sent in against rebels that were held up in a building or cave system, or would be alongside them when out on patrol. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Dwarf Spider Droid is created for Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Originally, all of the different Separatist groups were just going to be painted the same B1 battle droid color, but this was later changed to make the droid army more unique, with each faction having this assemblage of different droids. The Advanced Dwarf Spider Droid was created for the Republic Commando video game, and the Heavy DSD was created for the Clone Campaign's expansion pack for Star Wars Battlegrounds. Additional information comes from the visual dictionaries, complete locations, essential guide to droids, encyclopedias of starfighters and other vehicles, and Ultimate Star Wars. But most important of all, remember, if your Union rep doesn't have a plan for killing the burrowing spider robot that shoots lasers out of its face and calls for an even bigger spider friend, then just get another job. And the Force will be with you. Always. When a Star Destroyer is overkill and your Nebulon Bs keep getting stolen, go with the escort frigate. What's up, Meta Nerds? Today's video is all about the Imperial escort frigate, also known as the escort carrier. The escort carrier was used exclusively by a specialist branch of the Imperial Navy, known only to a few as the Imperial Storm Commandos.
Whatever they are, they're launching ties. Imperial escort carriers. Imperial what? They're not part of the regular Imperial Navy. They're exclusive to the Imperial Storm Commandos.
A lot of the details have been kept an Imperial secret, but there are some really interesting details we know about this ship. Based on its appearance compared to Rebel snub fighters, it looks to be about 150 meters or 492 feet long, about the same as a Rebel blockade runner. Its height is around 41 meters or 134 feet, making it about 1/12 the height of the Imperial Star Destroyer. And at a width of 71 meters or 233 feet, it was a little less than twice as wide as the CR-90. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be about as long as 16.5 school buses, or half the length of the Nimitz class while being nearly twice as wide, and be about as tall as a 13-story building. Compared to some other frigates, you might think this thing is relatively small, but it packed some amazing firepower. Right up top were a pair of single-barreled cannons, which based on their power output must have been some heavy turbolasers, as we see them easily blow apart this GR-75. On the ventral side, protecting the hangars, are two double-barreled weapons, though their power output is unknown. While at the very tip of the bow we see these additional two turrets, which were most likely medium turbolasers, or could fire ion shots to make a 1-2 combo with those bigger turbolasers up top. And all this firepower actually had some rebel pilots refer to this thing as a gunship.
Looks like some sort of gunship. Rebel scum.
All of these weapons made the escort carrier great for taking on smaller rebel capital ships or escort vessels, like the CR-90 and Hammerhead Corvette. But its lack of point defense lasers left much to be desired when it came to fending off rebel fighters. Again, because of the secretive nature of the Imperial escort carriers and the storm commandos that operated them, we don't know this ship's top speed in space or in atmosphere. But we can imagine that these three vertically arranged sublight engines must have been somewhat quick, as the storm commandos were often tasked with secret missions sabotaging the plans of rebel scum. And rebel accounts do tell us that it's slightly slower than your average X-Wing, while also commenting that it had decent speed for its size and was able to pull off some impressive turns and maneuvers. Now it's time for the carrier part. The midsection of this ship is one big hangar bay, which would often be full of TIE fighters and TIE bombers, along with the Storm Commando's preferred TIE hunters. The total amount of TIEs that could fit inside of this thing is unknown, with accounts ranging from 8 fighters to 72, which would be an entire Starfighter wing. The heavy firepower, decent speed and maneuverability, along with a large complement of fighters, was perfect for the Storm Commandos, as they were most known for kidnapping rebel crews, taking any escorts out with its laser cannons, and then sending a boarding party over on the fighters, picking up VIPs like rebel leaders or even their scientists.
Whoever that was, it looks like he's escaped with our scientists.
And when you wanted more stealth instead of just a smash-and-grab job, it took advantage of the fact that the TIE Hunters were one of the few TIE variants to come with a hyperdrive, and thus could follow the escort carrier into battle on its own, or use the carrier as a rendezvous point, traversing much of the distance in the carrier, and then making a short hyperspace jump to its final target. So that's it for its stats and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The Imperial escort carrier was most prominently featured in the video game Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3: Rebel Strike. Rogue Squadron encounters the escort carriers on several locations, including the Rings of Geonosis, and at the Imperial shipyards at Fondor. Captain Sarkley, a rebel pilot turned Imperial officer, commanded his own customized escort carrier, as he rounded up scientists from across the galaxy to work on Imperial projects. His escort carrier would be destroyed by Wedge Antilles over Geonosis, and this ship has been officially brought back into canon via the novel Tarkin, where an Imperial escort carrier is mentioned in the pursuit of the Grand Moff's very own personal corvette, when Tarkin's Carrion Spike stealth ship was stolen by rebels. So that's it for the Imperial escort carrier. But most important of all, remember, you gotta watch out for asteroids when flying close to Geonosis, and the Force will be with you, always. In addition to AT-ATs, the Empire pulled out a few of these juggernauts for the Battle of Hoth, and that's not the only Clone Wars era gear that they held onto. What's up, Meta Nerds? In this video, we're going to talk about the Juggernaut tanks used after the fall of the Republic, and other Clone Wars era vehicles that the Empire still found use for. During the Battle of Hoth, a small group of rebel survivors were able to find a damaged transport, abandoned by its Imperial passengers. This transport is referred to as a Juggernaut by one of those rebels, and the vehicle was driven back to Echo Base from their scouting position. It really showed off the Juggernaut tank's speed and hardiness as it, quote, raced over the abandoned trenches with a sickening jolt, undeterred and unharmed. This wheeled vehicle is a clever fit for the snowfields of Hoth, as its large independent wheels would allow it to stay fairly level, and would prevent rebel snowspeeders from dealing too much damage to it. It's unknown how the tank was transported to the planet's surface, but it was likely dropped off via Gazanti-class cruisers like with the AT-ATs. Now that story, and actually everything we're going to talk about in this video, is canon. So this would just be me speculating here, but maybe one day one of these cooler Legends transports might also be made canon, explaining how the Juggernaut would have been transported across the Empire. And while the Juggernaut moniker was only applied to the Kuat Drive Yard's HAVW-A6, a newer Imperial variant of this vehicle was seen in the Wobani Imperial Labor Camp, the HCVW-A9 turbo tank, also produced by Kuat Drive Yards. This direct Clone Wars descendant was less well armed, more suitable for areas where there wasn't too much threat of attack, unlike the combat tank role fulfilled by the A6. Now, Arthana Heavy Engineering was a subsidiary of Kuat Drive Yards, and they gave us one of the most important ships of the Clone Wars, the LAAT gunship. They would also make the LAAT Law Enforcement Patrol Transport, which was used by the Republic as a police cruiser, and you can kind of think of it as the LAAT-I's little brother. The Empire took policing to a whole new level, adding missile launchers to this vehicle, and instead of a local cop, it would be transporting a squad of stormtroopers or even more elite units. It was also space-worthy, and could be upgraded with a hyperdrive. This vehicle could both deliver the troopers and then provide them with some powerful air support. But it was not only Republic vehicles that the Empire repurposed. When available, they took from the Separatists too. An Imperial assault tank seen on Simoon 1 bore great similarities to the droid army's AAT, most likely being a refit of the defeated army's main battle tank. And the Empire was even known to have utilized advanced Umbaran designs, on occasion using the Umbaran mobile heavy cannon. This artillery walker was nearly indestructible, but due to the cost, expertise, and who had to build it, they were used in very limited numbers, only rarely being seen on battlefronts during the Galactic Civil War. And as you might expect, it wasn't just ships and vehicles, but the Empire also found uses for Republic weapons. The Z6 rotary cannon, a well-known weapon of the Clone Wars, found use in both the Stormtrooper Corps and the Imperial Army. In addition, the RPS-6 shoulder-mounted rocket launcher, used by both clones and Magnaguards, was still the go-to long-range infantry explosive for the Imperial Stormtrooper Corps. And of course, in those first couple years after the transition, we even see some use of things like Venators and V-Wings, most notably with Thrawn in the early years of his career. Using just a primitive trap, he was able to bring down a V-Wing. The Imperial troops that are hunting him are still wearing clone armor, and he sneaks on board in an Imperial Venator. So in this cool transition time, it was an Imperial Venator with Lambdas and V-Wings in its hangar bay. And later we even see Thrawn repurposing some Separatist droids, like Buzz droids and Droidicas, and he would end up fighting Vulture droids that were repurposed by Rebels. In these years, the Empire was still using clone walkers such as the ATTEs and ATRTs, and we even see Stormtroopers that are using DC-15As. But the biggest example would be the Purge Trooper, though be warned, getting into this will be a spoiler for Jedi Fallen Order. These elite Imperial troops are actually the last batch of fully grown clones from Kamino, and we see them using other Clone Wars equipment like the DC-15LE, and much like the other clones with Order 66, these troopers were tricked into turning on their Inquisitor leaders, and thus were replaced by regular humans. Unlike these smaller vehicles, pieces of equipment, and weapons, most of the Republic and Separatist capital ships were scrapped fairly early on. Most of their parts scavenged from enormous shipyards and upcycled into the Empire's new navy. The only Republic capital ship that remained in use with the Empire was the Arquitens-class light cruiser. Its production was never stopped and was used throughout the Rebellion era, though tweaked somewhat and modified for the Empire's use. It was seen as the perfect vessel for when a full Star Destroyer would be too expensive or overqualified for the job, and so you see it locking down relatively obscure planets. So that's it for a lot of the ships, weapons, and tech that were held over from the Clone Wars in canon. But you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The Empire taking Juggernauts to Hoth comes from the novel Battlefront Twilight Company, and we see V-Wings being used alongside TIEs in the Tarkin novel, while of course all of Thrawn's shenanigans comes from the Thrawn trilogy. The use of Umbaran artillery by the Empire comes from the game Star Wars Commander, and the weapons in Purge Trooper are both from comics and the Jedi Fallen Order game. As you might imagine, there are tons of real-world parallels to this, with some examples being in the reunification of Germany, where both Soviet and NATO equipment was for a time used side by side, as the decision on which to phase out and what would be issued in the future was made, as East and West Germany was unifying. It should also be noted that a Juggernaut being used on Hoth is very appropriate, as early concept art for that battle featured large wheeled tanks rather than the walkers we saw in the final film. And it was that concept art that inspired the Juggernaut that we saw in the prequels. So it's like poetry, it rhymes. But most important of all, remember, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Unless it's a Venator, in which case it's too dangerous to be left alive. And the Force will be with you. Always.
I've taken the liberty of upgrading the Rogue Shadow sensor array. Now you'll be able to spy on any suspect ships within the entire system.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is all about the Rogue Shadow, the personal starship of Darth Vader's secret apprentice, codenamed Starkiller. Secretly commissioned by Darth Vader, the Rogue Shadow was designed and built by Signar Fleet Systems sometime between 18 and 3 BBY. Based heavily on the design of the Scimitar, Darth Maul's personal infiltrator, the ship shared the distinctive radiator panels common to many Signar products. With a stated length of 65 meters or just over 213 feet, a width of 58.5 meters or 192 feet, and a height of 25.3 meters or 83 feet, the Rogue Shadow was much larger than many of the personal transports and even light freighters that it was made to blend in with. It was almost twice as long as the Millennium Falcon, and was over 6 times the length of the TIE Advanced X-1, about the length of 7 1/4 standard school buses. It was as wide as 2 Millennium Falcons plus a TIE Advanced, or 22 school buses across. It was almost exactly as tall as the Lambda-class shuttle in its landed configuration, or equal to a 6-story building here on Earth. But don't worry, at the end of the video we're going to talk about why there's some discrepancy in the size. It tends to change different times we see it. Designed to be a mobile base of operations for Starkiller, the Rogue Shadow carried consumables for a year and had a cargo capacity of 15 tons, a weight equal to 18.5 dewbacks. A large portion of the space inside was given over to Starkiller's training room, a large, empty, circular space where he could meditate, spar with the provided proxy-type droids, or receive covert instructions from his master. The Rogue Shadow was a technological marvel in every way. For combat situations, it was equipped with standard laser cannons, but these rarely needed to be employed due to its other abilities. It had a hyperdrive rating of 0.5, tied with the famed Millennium Falcon, and otherwise faster than even the most heavily modified smuggler and bounty hunter craft. It had an incredible max sublight speed of 1,350 km per hour, or 839 miles per hour, which was about 100 km per hour faster than the TIE Interceptor, and 50 km per hour faster than the Rebel A-Wing. Its primary pilot, Juno Eclipse, enhanced its already impressive sensor suite to the point that it could monitor any ship present in the same system that the Rogue Shadow was lurking in. Like Darth Maul's Sith infiltrator before it, the Rogue Shadow came equipped with the experimental Stygium crystal cloaking device that could conceal the ship completely from scanners, to the point that it was comfortable hovering directly above the remains of the Jedi Temple, and even navigating inside of the first Death Star without being detected. Unfortunately, all of the personnel and droids responsible for creating the Rogue Shadow couldn't take pride in their creation for too long, as they were all killed in various industrial accidents and street crimes, ordered by Darth Vader in order to ensure the existence of this ship remained a secret. In the Legends continuity, the Rogue Shadow was instrumental in forming the Rebel Alliance. Starkiller would use it on several missions, and it would actually be piloted by 7 different people, before he and Captain Eclipse would take it on a series of missions to hunt down the Jedi survivor Ram Koda, Kazdan Paratus, and Shaak Ti. Vader would stage Starkiller's death, apparently to fool the Emperor, before tasking his apprentice to gather an army of dissenters and rebels that they could use to topple the Dark Lord. The Rogue Shadow would be Starkiller's base of operations as he gathered General Koda, Bail Organa, and the young Princess Leia Organa as the founders of the Rebel Alliance. But the whole operation would prove to be a trap set by Darth Vader and the Emperor to root out dissidents. After failing to prevent the new Rebel leadership's capture on Corellia, Starkiller would tear his way through the incomplete first Death Star, before facing down the Emperor himself in the throne room. Unable to defeat him entirely, Starkiller instead sacrifices his life to buy the rebellion enough time to board the Rogue Shadow, where they were able to escape and make their way to Kashyyyk, having the true founding ceremony of the rebellion. But Vader had a plan, as roughly a year later in 1 BBY, Darth Vader had him cloned on Kamino, though he would escape and try and find his love, the Rogue Shadow's pilot Juno Eclipse. His first stop would be Cato Neimoidia, where he would reunite with General Koda, and they would escape in the radically refitted Rogue Shadow. Koda had haphazardly modified the ship as a troops transport, leaving all sorts of exposed wiring and bulkhead panels scattered throughout the once clean interior. Exteriorly, the ship frame appears to have been almost completely rebuilt, now being completely symmetrical, including the wings, and with new engines and even a different ball cockpit. The clone Starkiller would partake in the Rebels' assault on Vader's Kaminoan cloning facilities, a battle that ended when Vader was defeated and taken prisoner, from a certain point of view. In the Rogue Shadow's last known mission, a restrained Darth Vader was loaded aboard to be taken for trial, with Boba Fett Slave 1 in hot pursuit. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The art and making of The Force Unleashed goes into some of the goals the designers had when making the Rogue Shadow. Like how Starkiller was supposed to represent a dark, alternative version of Luke, and so the Rogue Shadow was meant to be this dark, alternative Millennium Falcon. While the official length of the Rogue Shadow comes from the Force Unleashed campaign guide, in-game its size is depicted very inconsistently. In some cutscenes it looks slightly larger than a Lambda or Sheathipede, while on Dagobah you can jump up on top of it, and it's about the size of a large starfighter. Definitely not 6 stories tall and multiples of the Falcon. Also, this smaller depiction doesn't really make sense with the enormous training room it's supposed to have, and so maybe we can just say it's some sort of TARDIS, being bigger on the inside. But most important of all, remember, most private contractors working for a Dark Lord never make it to retirement. And the Force will be with you. Always. You ever wonder if anyone besides Palpatine could have executed Order 66? What's up, meta nerds? This video is all about a Jedi that was able to execute Order 66. Of course, this was after the infamous ending of the Clone Wars. It's a really interesting story from this canon comic. I'll explain how this happened and how it ties into the Purge Troopers, who would play a big role in the Fallen Order game. And then at the end there's a little speculation on how he may have pulled this off, so I really want to get your guys' opinion on this. Important background information is that there were 150 of these so-called General Orders, which were memorized by every clone. This is true in canon as well via the sourcebook Rise of the Separatists, but in Legends we do get a lot more detail. A quote from Order 66, a Republic Commando novel reads, Karaika, we've got 150 Shabla contingency rules. Everything from arresting the Chancellor if he goes gaga, to reducing key allied worlds to slag if they switch sides. So for example, 4 and 5 deal with the transfer of command if the Supreme Chancellor is unfit, Order 37 deals with the suppression of communications concerning civilian casualties and disposal of their bodies, a particularly dark order. While again with 65 we see that it concerns the removal of the Chancellor, even allowing for lethal force to be used. And just a funny side note, Palpatine added Order 151 right after Darth Vader's creation, at a time when the army was mostly still clones, and so it would have turned the entire clone army against Vader. But as you can see by the detail in these orders, the Senate was involved in their creation. A lot of the orders revolve around the transfer of power, and there were a bunch of fail-safes in place against Palpatine. And so one of the things people have always wondered is, could anybody just say, execute order so-and-so, and like a spell, the clones would all just fall in line? Well, this canon story sheds some light on what that might look like. On Mon Cala in 18 BBY, 1 year after the end of the war, Farron Barr is a Jedi survivor in hiding. He's consumed with finding out how and why the clones turned against their Jedi partners, saying, quote, "I've been studying the Purge, trying to understand how we could lose so completely, so quickly. I learned about Order 66, poor deluded Dooku, just how deeply it went. But still, we should have been able to foresee our doom. We were peering outward, when we should have been looking at ourselves." I think that shows that he came across some combination of information on the story of Tipley's death, and/or Tup's and Five's role in the revelation of the inhibitor chips. We see that he really understood the workings and secret projects of Kamino. When he is confronted by the Inquisitors and their Purge troopers, he uses the Force to rip their helmets off. He sees the faces of young clones of Jango Fett, just like the troopers he once fought alongside. It is just as he predicted, that these clones were the last batch, released just after the Purge. But they would still have the inhibitor chips in their brains, which were all implanted early in the clones' growth. He also knows that the Inquisitors themselves are Jedi that were captured and turned to the dark side. And with the knowledge of how Sidious so quickly cut down the Jedi Order, he tries his hand at it. As he hoped, the clones turn on the Jedi, firing at him but also at their Inquisitor masters. And they even kill the 10th brother. During the fight, Barr says that the clones are merely machines, little better than droids. A shocking statement to hear coming from a Jedi, but you could see it as part of the truth in what he's saying is that the very fact that he ordered them just like a voice command. But I think there was a bit more going on here, and I really want to see what you guys think. All throughout this comic, we see that Farron Barr is not your typical Jedi. Perhaps driven to take these colder tactics during such pressing times, we see that he uses his Force powers to manipulate the minds of his early followers. He Force tricks them into joining him, and he's fine with pushing them to actions that he knows will lead to their death. Also, something about this scene is a bit off. If you look close, it appears that he may be manipulating King Lichar, with the Mon Cala's immediate and simple response of yes, yes. If we use the details we have from Legends on the orders, the clones needed this order to be verified as coming from the Supreme Chancellor, and we can assume that the orders that were against the Chancellor had to be verified as coming from the Senate. And that makes a lot of sense. If the Chancellor went rogue and did something that the Senate disapproved of, like, I don't know, killing off the whole Jedi Order, if the Senate disapproved of that, they could have just as easily used the GAR to remove or kill Palpatine. Problem was, as the Sith Lord so eloquently put it,
I am the Senate.
Meaning not just that he took all their power, but that he had so manipulated them that they would always agree with him, even to the point of believing this Jedi conspiracy. The few dissidents would be drowned out by the cheering support of whatever he did, and so it isn't as easy as a spell, that you merely have to say execute Order 66 and the army robotically obeys the voice command. The inhibitor chip may help to make this happen, overriding whatever bond those clones might have had with their Jedi, or likewise if the Senate issued it, it would override any bonds that they might have had for their Chancellor. But still not from anyone's command, but only coming from the Chancellor or the Senate. So I think Barr may have used some sort of mind trick in conjunction with the correct voice command. We see his fingers in the typical persuasion stance, and the comic arc goes out of its way to show us that he's really skilled at this, and does it often. It wouldn't make sense if everyone could just issue this command, but it does leave open an interesting idea that perhaps if Mason friends weren't in such a rush to confront Darth Sidious, they could have tried telling the Senate to execute Order 65, or even the Jedi themselves could have issued it by mind-tricking a group of clones into perceiving the order as coming from the Senators. I thought that was really interesting, but what do you think of all this? I really want to know your guys' thoughts on this story. At first I didn't like the idea of this Jedi being able to execute Order 66, but I think when combined with the Force mind trick it may make sense. So what do you think the implications are for the lore and what-if scenarios? Do you think it makes sense if Barr was using a mind trick in conjunction with the voice command? Please let me know down in the comments below. As for behind the scenes facts, this story comes from the Darth Vader comics 13 to 17, and here are some of the Legends books referenced. But most important of all, remember, Mace really should have went to the Senate instead of rushing to the Senate, and the Force will be with you. Always. Contrary to popular belief, stormtroopers were quite capable soldiers that went through extensive training. In fact, they're often seen as the elite troopers on the field alongside regular soldiers of the Imperial military. But sometimes even they weren't elite enough. This is where the Death Troopers came in. What's up, Meta Nerds? This video will cover the Death Troopers' origins, their unique training, tech, and armament, as well as their use in the Empire and even the Imperial Remnant, as well as some cool behind-the-scenes facts. Death Troopers were selected by Imperial intelligence from the best and brightest of the Stormtrooper Corps, and were transferred to Scarif where they underwent further specialized training. This included advanced instruction in hand-to-hand combat, infiltration, marksmanship, and guerrilla tactics. They were taught to be extremely stealthy when necessary, and always covered their tracks to erase any evidence of their mission. Being above average in height and strongly built were required upon admission to the Death Trooper program, but in addition to that, the trainees underwent physical and genetic augmentation to make them even stronger, sharper, and of course, deadlier. However, the exact extent of these modifications is unknown, as the entire program was shrouded in secrecy. At the same time, the Imperial Military Department of Advanced Weapons Research was collecting necrotic tissue. As this info spread, it led to rumors of the Empire working on reanimating fallen soldiers and turning them into mindless killing machines. Those would indeed become the undead troopers implemented sometime between 1 and 3 ABY, but though that project wouldn't be finished for decades, Palpatine capitalized on these fears, personally naming this secret special forces unit the Death Troopers. When they weren't carrying out covert ops, they were organized into small squads and acted as personal security entourage for a few of the highest-ranking Imperials. They were fiercely loyal to whoever they served, taking orders from no one else. They were a major part of the Tarkin Initiative, which conducted high-tech weapons development. So many of the Moffs and Admirals within this program may have had Death Trooper squads at their disposal. However, the only ones known for sure are Grand Admiral Thrawn, Director Krennic, Grand Moff Tarkin, and Moff Gideon. Gideon's possession of a Death Trooper squad may mean that he was a member of a high-tech weapons program, which has some interesting implications for his interest in the Force-sensitive Yoda species. Most Death Troopers came equipped with an E11D blaster carbine, an updated version of the standard Imperial E11 that boasted increasing stopping power, range, and reliability. They also carried an SE-14R repeating blaster pistol as a sidearm, and though this was a weapon mostly used by the Empire, it's also seen in the hands of a lot of non-Imperials during this era. Its ability to fire either a single shot or a rapid 5-blast burst made it incredible for close-quarters combat, and that's why it has these two scopes, one for each firing mode. While they most often carried their trusty E11D, in addition to this, they were also proficient with the DLT-19 heavy blaster rifle, which was a favorite heavy blaster among the Empire. The sniper configuration of this weapon, the DLT-19D targeting blaster, would be swapped in when the mission required extended range or accuracy. Death Troopers were also equipped with 3 Merson C-25 fragmentation grenades for use against personnel. But they also had a compressed baradium thermal detonator for taking out armored vehicles, or breaching doors in reinforced structures. So it's safe to say that a standard Death Trooper's armament packed quite a punch. Much like their training and equipment, their gear was also much more advanced than the average Stormtroopers. The armor was constructed with a similar plastoid, but coated in a spray polymer material called Reflect that made them nearly invisible to enemy sensors. Under the armor, they wore an environmentally sealed bodysuit to carry out operations on any planet in the Empire. Their helmets contained vocal scramblers which produced their distinctive communications during battle, which only they could understand. That way nobody could overhear their tactics or what they were planning.
Search the house!
The 2 green dots at the bottom front of the helmet were image-intensifying active pulse emitters, which worked in concert with the micro-motion sensors to give them an increased battlefield awareness. To the right of their visor is the NeuroSav macro-motion monitor, which gave them a detailed HUD that showed friendly and enemy positions on the battlefield, integrating multi-frequency targeting and acquisition sensor systems. And since it's called a NeuroSav, I'm guessing this must have somehow integrated into their nervous system, having some sort of surgically implanted attachment port to the helmet. Another really interesting feature is that this black pauldron appears featureless to most, but when viewed through the Death Trooper visor, it showed them information like their rank and specialist status. As for their history, they would serve closely with the Empire's VIPs for decades. They were introduced as early as 18 BBY, just 1 year after the Clone Wars, where their first notable mission would be to secure the Death Star construction site. Tarkin takes his squad of Death Troopers to confront Vader over the recent breaches in security, and the Emperor then tasks his apprentice with hunting down these saboteurs. Tracking them down to Geonosis, Vader is met by Krennic. Krennic brought his retinue of Death Troopers, but the conversation was cut short by an assassination attempt. Furious, the Dark Lord of the Sith took the Death Troopers with him to go hunt down the rogue Geonosian hive that was rebelling against the Empire. You see, most of the Geonosians had been convinced by Poggle the Lesser to ally with the new Empire, and to help continue the construction of this superweapon that was once planned to be created for the Separatists. These rogues would not interfere with his master's vision, and the Death Troopers helped Vader to eliminate the hive and their queen. 5 years later in 13 BBY, Krennic would use these special forces to help convince Galen Erso to come back to work on the Death Star superlaser. More than a decade later, we see them serving with Grand Admiral Thrawn of the 7th Fleet. They would capture former ISB agent turned rebel spy Agent Kallus, and assist in the capture of Chopper Base during the Battle of Adalon. Here they would capture top rebels like General Jan Dodonna and Captain Hera Syndulla. And when attacked by an ancient Force user known as the Bendu, the Death Troopers were able to bring about this creature's defeat. Always used to protect important assets, we also see them accompanying shipments of Kyber crystals heading to the Death Star, and helping to keep the TIE Defender project under wraps, while also assisting Thrawn's assassin Rook in his hunt for the Spectres, and guard one of the Empire's most important discoveries, the long-lost Jedi Temple on Lothal. An important thing to consider for the future of this elite unit is that many were still on board Thrawn's flagship, the Chimera, when it was taken into hyperspace by the Purrgil. Jumping forward to 9 ABY, 5 years after the destruction of the second Death Star, we see them in the service of ex-Imperial Security Bureau agent Moff Gideon. Many high-ranking Imperial officials turned into warlords during the fracturing of the Empire, and we see just how terrifying these elite troopers could be against those who tried to resist the Moff's wishes. Remember, they were always attached to Imperial officials working closely on top-secret projects, so this may be even more evidence that his interest in the infant has to do with some sort of secret, perhaps cloning weapons program. Then around 50 years after their creation, former Stormtrooper turned First Order Security Bureau agent Terex had a Death Trooper helmet in his quarters aboard Grand Moff Tarkin's old flagship, the Carrion Spike. So that's it for their history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The Death Troopers were likely inspired by the 2009 Legends novel, Death Troopers, in which Palpatine experiments in using a mix of Imperial tech and Sith alchemy to turn deceased Stormtroopers into zombie-like monsters. Like many weapons used in the first Star Wars film, the DLT-19 heavy blaster rifle was modified from existing World War II movie props, this one being based on the MG42 German light machine gun. It's unclear if this same process was done for Rogue One, or if they were made from molds of these originals. The Death Troopers first appeared in Rogue One, but were also featured heavily in many episodes of Star Wars Rebels, and now The Mandalorian. As for comics, they can be seen in the Darth Vader and Dr. Aphra series. And a ton of this information comes from the Rogue One visual guidebook, which features a really in-depth breakdown of their gear and equipment. But most important of all, remember, as Cassian Andor once said, it's the troopers you don't see that get you, and the Force will be with you, always. Sometimes going for the head just isn't enough. What's up, Meta Nerds? Today we're going to be taking a look at the IG-100 Magnaguard, covering everything from who was responsible for constructing these Jedi killers, their connection to one famously congested Kaleesh, and even what happened to these true technological terrors after the Clone Wars. The IG-100 Magnaguard, or simply referred to as the Magnaguards, were part of the infamous IG series of droids built by Holowan Mechanicals. Holowan also proudly presented such fearsome creations as the IG-86 Sentinel droid, commonly used by gangsters during the Clone Wars, the IGRM bodyguard and enforcer seen up through the Imperial era, and most famously, the IG series assassin droids. They were also the manufacturer of the Magnaguard's most memorable weapon, the Electro Staff, which we'll break down in just a bit. Standing at 1.95 meters tall, or just under 6 foot 5 inches, the Magnaguard was almost 2.5 Ewoks in stature. And weighing in at 123 kilograms, or roughly 271 pounds, you can be certain that your elite force of bodyguards won't just be kicked down by any old clone trooper. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be just an inch shorter than Michael Jordan, and be twice the weight of Asimov, and is slightly more proficient at killing organics than Sophia. These droids had masculine programming and could speak Basic, though they rarely made any noise at all, and usually came equipped with 2 red photoreceptor eyes, as well as a backup system placed in their chests. The only time you see them without this crimson stare was in the Clone Wars TV show, when Count Dooku was seen protected by Magnaguards with these eerie yellow eyes. Though not much has been said in canon or legends about this variant, but these are said to be even more deadly than their stock model. But no matter the variant, all Magnaguards are protected by strong duranium plates, the same material used in the armor of General Grievous, making your Magnaguards far more durable than your typical B1. And they're also known to be sporting capes. These capes often bore similar markings to the ones on Grievous's mask, called the Marks of Mumu, which is a beast from the General's homeworld of Kali. Kinda like how the Mandalorians are always repping the Mythosaur. And since we keep talking about him, let's discuss the history between General Grievous and his ferocious Magnaguards. Very little information has been given to us in the current canon, aside from these droids being used as elite bodyguards by the Separatists. But this topic was expanded upon far more in Legends. When Grievous became the coughing cyborg we all know and love, he insisted on having an elite guard similar to what he had during his glory days of fighting the Huck. Separatist leader Count Dooku got in contact with Hollow-On Mechanicals, which soon presented their impressive new model of combat droids to Grievous. The cyborg would single-handedly train each and every Magnaguard in the art of combating his most hated enemy, the Jedi. As the training progressed, each member of Grievous's guard would develop their own unique fighting style, some becoming more adept in close-quarters combat, while others were more proficient in long-range weaponry. This gave the Kalish General a varied group of deadly warriors to both protect him and help him in his crusade of eliminating Jedi scum. And help him they did. One time we see these machines used extremely efficiently was in the capture of Jedi Council member Eth Koth. After his clone troopers were wiped out by commando droids, Eth Koth was left to face off against Grievous and 4 of these mechanical monsters. You can see how they let their master duel with this Jedi master, always encircling Koth just in case he somehow gained the upper hand. Which is exactly what happened thanks to the Jedi's pesky ally, the Force. After being pushed into the window of Koth's Venator, Grievous very well may have been struck down by this Jedi if it wasn't for his trusty team of Magnaguards. Having surrounded Koth, one of them prodded the doomed Jedi in the back with an electro staff. Though he bravely continued the duel, anytime Master Koth clashed his sabers against those of Grievous, he would receive another painful poke in the back by the Magnaguards. Cowardly? Perhaps, but you can't argue with the results. Count Dooku seemed to agree, because we saw his yellow-eyed Magnaguards employ a very similar tactic against Anakin Skywalker, which left the Chosen One in the clutches of the Count. When Kit Fisto infiltrated Grievous's fortress, the general was able to remotely activate his Magnaguards. They tried locking down the entire castle, and were almost able to defeat the clones and Jedi, even successfully landing a rocket on their new class transport. But with the Force on their side, Fisto was able to escape. The bounty hunter, Cad Bane, was allowed at least one Magnaguard in order to help with his torture of Jedi Master Bolo Ropal, where he was trying to have him open up the Kyber memory crystal. Other times we see the Magnaguards used are during the kidnapping of Rhoda the Hutt, where they gave a very difficult fight to a young Ahsoka. We also see them on both the Invisible Hand, and on Utapau defending General Grievous from Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was during that mission to save the Senate that we saw how the IG-100 could continue to fight without a head. The only true way to destroy these things was to knock out its backup chest processor as well. Or if you could, do what General Grievous advised.
Crush them! Make them suffer!
Now that we covered their history, let's take a deep look into the unorthodox arsenal of the Magnaguards. Let's start with canon. Since we have just one weapon to cover, the infamous Electro Staff. A collab effort by both Hollow-On Mechanicals and Bactoid Armor Workshop, the Electro Staff came in 2 slightly different variations. One having a metallic hilt armed with these 2 transparent ends, and the other having a slightly longer black hilt, with these mechanical devices at the end spewing the purple electricity. Both models were capable of blocking lightsaber strikes, thanks to them being made of frick alloy, one of the few lightsaber-resistant materials in the galaxy, and what Darth Sidious's lightsaber is made out of. And though normally purple, this staff has also been seen with yellow electrical currents buzzing around at the ends. While mainly used as a blunt force weapon to fight off Jedi, the Electro Staff was often employed in torturing prisoners, and it's said that 5 seconds of continuous electrocution from these stabs could very well stop a heart. Moving over to Legends, Magnaguards were armed with a cavalcade of varying weapons. We've seen them deployed into combat with Bulldog rocket launchers, RD-4 grenade launchers, poison gas, and Mark IV recon droids. Those loadouts usually meant leaving the staff behind, but did give the Magnaguards a better chance when fighting enemies at range. These droids also had their own personal fighter craft, the Rogue-class Starfighter, which was always seen adorned with the symbol of General Grievous. And these weren't your standard pilot droids either. They were adept enough to shoot down Anakin Skywalker during that mission to save Rhoda the Hutt. And as you might expect, there are many different variants of the Magnaguards themselves, with all kinds of different specialized tech and gadgets. Some had built-in tow cables, magnetized limbs for spacewalks and climbing buildings, and even a personal cloaking device. While another Magnaguard seems to have had telescopic arms. Some could even fire these small seeking missiles from internal magazines that were packed into their back plating. But if all else failed, they had an incredibly powerful self-destruct sequence. The fate of these highly skilled and incredibly deadly droids is similar to many of those that serve the CIS, shut down on Mustafar by Lord Vader. However, a few would pop up decades later under the service of Gracchus the Hutt. Gracchus, just like Grievous, had them as personal bodyguards, and was even able to use them to fend off Luke Skywalker. At least for some time, as they managed to give the upstart Jedi quite a fight. That story's canon, but in Legends it was also used by Geyser Delzo, a CIS holdout unwilling to bend the knee to Emperor Palpatine, who launched a failed droid rebellion on Mustafar. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Magnaguards were first introduced in Revenge of the Sith, and we were apparently supposed to see a lot more of them. According to stunt coordinator Nick Gillard, Obi-Wan was meant to have an epic 5-man fight against Grievous's guards on Utapau. They even trained for it, but it was George Lucas who decided to change the things to what we saw. Would have been an awesome fight, but Lucas went with the clever homage to Indiana Jones and the Cairo Swordsman. Magnaguards have not spoken in the current canon, aside from that squeal we hear when let out in Revenge of the Sith. But in the video game for that movie, we actually get to hear their very intimidating voices.
Foolish Jedi, prepare to be dismantled.
Finally, the look for the Magnaguards comes from the unused concept art for Grievous himself. He just liked the soulless crimson gaze of the Magnaguards so much that he made them the elite guard of that new site. But most important of all, remember, never bring a blaster to a lightsaber fight. Bring an electro staff, unless you're Kenobi. And the Force will be with you. Always. A clone army is nothing without powerful weaponry. What's up, meta nerds? Today we'll be covering the infantry weapons of the Republic clone army, including their technical details, notable uses, and even some behind-the-scenes facts. When the Kaminoans accepted the job to create a clone army, they had to provide some excellent hardware. The primary weapons of the clone army were those of Blastech's DC series. The DC-15 blaster rifle could hold up to 500 shots worth of ammo on its standard mode, though it's recorded that on the high-power firing modes, the DC-15A can fire 300 shots, with each being able to punch a half a meter or 1.6-foot hole into ferrocrete. The rifle was just under 1.5 meters in length and had exceptional range. It was usually fired on a fully automatic setting, and had fairly low recoil for this rate of fire. During the Clone Wars, Republic Senate commandos would use a customized version of this rifle, featuring a wooden buttstock and grip. A variant of this weapon known as the DC-15LE was customizable to include a fully integrated scope system and other useful modifications, such as explosive blasts and lowered recoil impulse. This weapon was used to great effect by the Imperial Purge troopers in those early years of Imperial transition. The DC-15A carbine was the DC-15S's smaller brother, sacrificing range for a lower weight and more manageable size. It had very similar specifications to the larger blaster, and even used the same charge magazines, making logistics a bit easier. This blaster had a stock, but it was rarely unfolded, as most troopers seemed to just favor leaving it stowed. Both this blaster and its larger brother could fire ascension cables, most notably on Christophsis, where clone troopers from the 501st were able to zipline from one tower to another to reinforce their brothers in the 212th. And later would use this same zipline firing tactic to do a vertical assault on the separatist-controlled monastery on Teth. The DC-17 blaster pistol was the standard issue clone sidearm, and was the favorite among officers and special forces troopers. This pistol was incredibly powerful for its light weight, in fact being more powerful per shot than the DC-15A carbine, while also still having a good rate of fire, and could survive through tough battlefront conditions. Like the DC-15 series, the DC-17 featured a stun mode. Rex utilized a pair of these pistols to great effect during both the Clone Wars and later against the Empire. Along with Rex, many other ARC troopers such as Colt and Fives would also dual-wield these weapons, and we even see it with Bad Batch. The Grand Army would also field a number of specialized infantry weapons, used by specifically trained troops in certain scenarios. The Blastech Z6 rotary cannon, made by Mersan Industries and Legends, was a fast-firing, powerful weapon capable of mowing down battle droids and other foes at an incredible rate of 166 blasts per second, and found it useful on both offense and defense. Clone Commander Thorn of the Coruscant Guard utilized this weapon often, most notably during his last stand against the overwhelming droid forces on Scipio. This weapon has allowed many clones to survive far longer than otherwise possible against impossible odds. Another specialized heavy weapon was the Reciprocating Quad Blaster, or SIP Quad. This was an experimental weapon that didn't see much use outside of Hypori or Coruscant, but essentially turned a trooper into a mobile turret. The weapon would rest on the back and be pulled overhead and into position when firing, along with the necessary micro-repulsors to create some anti-grav to offset this weapon's great weight. ARC heavy gunner troopers were especially trained in this weapon, and wore these unique helmets that worked in the targeting for the SIP Quad. It was so powerful that it was even used against snail tanks and AATs, and even to fend off General Grievous. Though never rising to the usage of the Z6, it was actually retained in small numbers and employed by the Empire decades later. While another obscure but awesome weapon was the Westar M5, made by the Mandalorians, who also produced the well-known Westar 34 used by Jango, and 35 used by Pre Vizsla. This blaster was only seen with the first batch of ARC troopers. It had a high rate of fire with decent accuracy, while also being strong enough to punch through the top of an armored assault tank, which might not be the strongest point on the tank, but still it's an incredible feat. It was most notably used by Alpha 17, who particularly loved that underslung reel of pump-action firing missiles. The DC-17M interchangeable weapon system was used only by the elite Republic commandos, like Delta Squad and Clone Force 99. It had multiple special attachments, allowing the blaster to be used as a standard assault rifle, a sniper rifle, or even grenade launcher, all easy enough to be changed during combat. Despite this great feature, both this and the M5 seem to have died off with the Republic. And though this gets confusing, the Clone Commando sidearm was referred to in Legends as the DC-15S, and it worked in a really unique way. It was packed with at least 250 shots, but a slow charge feature kept it so it seemed like it had limitless ammo. It was very powerful, but it only let you squeeze off 7 shots before its complex gas charging combo system would build up another bolt. This might seem limiting, but as Sev once said, quote, "The DC-15S blaster isn't my favorite weapon, but it never runs out of ammo, and that counts for something in a firefight."
Bring in the flamethrowers!
In some situations, the Republic Army would also utilize powerful flamethrowers to very deadly effect. Little is known about these weapons in terms of specifics, but they were a powerful, if brutal option, especially in close quarters like the cave systems on Geonosis. And we do see that a flame trooper unit is retained into the Empire. The Valken 38X and the DC-15X were sniper rifles used by the specialist sharpshooters of the Clone Army. Each was a powerful, semi-automatic blaster with a long-distance scope, capable of eliminating foes in a single shot, sending that bolt over many kilometers. And the Valken was so deadly that one of the galaxy's most feared bounty hunters, Dengar, would end up using this rifle throughout the Imperial era.
The latest from Sienna.
Rocket launchers.
Shoulder fire. Very expensive.
The RPS-6 rocket launcher was an unguided anti-tank weapon that boasted long range and a powerful warhead. And as we saw with the Onderon Resistance, it could bring down the feared HMP droid gunship. Though on other battlefronts, like the dark jungles of Umbara, we see that this species' unique and high-tech shielding systems allowed the mobile heavy cannon to take multiple direct hits without flinching, while a more high-tech solution was the PLX-1. Merson Munitions created this portable missile launcher that could be fired in a dumb mode, but also had the smart tracking GAM or gravity-activated mode. That would identify and lock on to a target's gravity silhouette, instead of just something like a heat signature that might be thrown off by flares, and thus was often more reliable against a wide variety of both land and air targets. 2 missiles could be packed into the launcher at once, and the firing mechanism is actually a sort of mass driver, like a miniature version of what we see on the ATT. And though not retained by the Empire, some of these were discovered and utilized by rebels. In addition to these high explosives, another staple of the Clone Army were the droid popper EMP grenades, capable of taking out most droids without collateral damage, as seen on Onderon. Here the Jedi would provide these weapons to the Onderon Resistance, and teach them that if you rolled these grenades slow enough, they could slip past the droidica's shields, erupting with electricity that would fry their circuits. And then in addition to all this, the clones also had the Blastech EWHB-12 heavy blaster cannon, which could either be manned by a clone team, or actually fired in an automated mode, which made it a great option as a base sentry. And this weapon was the predecessor to the much-feared Imperial E-Web heavy cannon. It should be noted that the blasters used by the Clone Army all had unique blue bolts. This was due to the hyper-ionization of the blaster gas, allowing these weapons to deal an added level of electromagnetic damage to targets, especially useful when fighting a hostile army of droids. The Separatist army and later Imperial military had little use for this extra specialization, instead utilizing the more common and cheaper gas mixes that produced a more standard red bolt, which was still more than enough for most targets. While the cause of the yellow bolts fired by the Mandos is still a closely guarded secret. The eventual main Imperial replacement for the DC-15A carbine was the E11. The standard version held less energy and less gas, and so it put out less bolts per magazine than the clone predecessor, but they could be upgraded with some specialized magazines. And funny enough, perhaps Palpatine's little inside joke to himself that he was the puppet master for both sides, is that the E11 is in fact Blastech's successor to the droid army standard issue weapon, the E5 blaster carbine. Much like how Kuat Drive Yards and their subsidiary Rathana Heavy Engineering were responsible for most of the clone army vehicles, almost every clone infantry weapon was sourced by Blastech Industries. So if you need some buy and hold stocks, bet on the promise of war in a galaxy far, far away. So that's it for their history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The PLX-1 is from the original Battlefront games, but came back in the Battlefront novel Twilight Company and is in Star Wars Commander. Also, I just wanted to mention some amazing DC-15 stats and legends. It's said to have an effective firing range of 10 kilometers or 6.21 miles, and it weighs as much as 9.5 pounds. That's a range greater than any gun here on Earth, and would weigh about 2 pounds more than an M16. Like most Star Wars blasters, the clone weapons take inspiration from real-life firearms, with parts from the German MG34 going into both the DC-15 and the Valken sniper rifle, while the Desert Eagle was the inspiration for the DC-17 pistol. The DC-17M of course made its original debut in the video game Republic Commando, and due to a writing error in the Clone Wars episode Death Trap, the DC-15S carbine came to be known as the DC-15A, being cited as such in later lore sources. Additional information comes from these comics and guidebooks, and if you want to learn more about these specialized clone units and go deeper into each of these weapons, we do have playlists for those. But most important of all, remember, when creating a clone army, pick a great template and even better hardware, and the Force will be with you, always.
Blast, this is why I hate flying.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is all about the Delta 7 Aether Sprite class light interceptor, commonly known as the Jedi Starfighter. It was manufactured by Kuat Engineering Systems, a subsidiary of the larger Kuat drive yards that seems to focus on the company's few Starfighter products, being the manufacturer of the Republic's V-Wings, Edit 2 interceptors, and decades later even the early RZ-1A wings. The cost of a new Delta 7 varied widely depending on which version you wanted. The standard model was 180,000 credits, which is 30k more than the later T-65 X-Wing and 3 times that of a standard TIE fighter. If you wanted the most expensive, high-speed variation though, it would cost you 385,000 credits. That's 85k more than even the elite TIE Defender. However, even your most successful spice dealer would be hard-pressed to buy any type of Delta 7, as you're not going to find them at your local dealership. Designed by Walex Blissix, the same man responsible for designing the Victory-class Star Destroyer and many other vessels crucial to the Republic, he worked closely with the Jedi Order to develop ships that were built around their Force abilities. The cockpit was laid out especially to cater to Jedi pilots. The controls were simplified, so that the ship would respond instantly as the pilot sensed the next action through the Force. Many had their standard seats replaced with special meditation chairs to make those long flights across the galaxy a bit more bearable. Everything about its design was intended to make it the fastest and most nimble ship of the time. The frame tried to have one of the smallest profiles possible, at only 8 meters or 26¼ feet long, 3.92 meters or nearly 13 feet wide, and only 1.44 meters, or just under 5 feet tall. This made it about a Senate longer than a TIE fighter, a third as wide as the X-Wing, and 1.5 R2 units tall. If it was trying to keep the peace here on Earth, the Delta 7 would be about a mini-me shorter than 2 Honda Civics, about 2 Civics wide, and about 1.5 Vespa scooters tall.
We haven't got much time. Anakin? Anakin, do you copy? This is Obi-Wan Kenobi.
The ship was so small that the original version could not even fit a standard astromech droid. Instead, they had to make the R3D and RP4 models, which were hardwired into the ship as targeting and navigational aids. The powerful sublight engines bolted onto the small frame were the secrets to its speed. Fitted with 2 J-44 Jet Force sublight engines, the Interceptor had a maximum acceleration of 5,000 G, and had a top atmospheric speed of 1,260 km per hour. That was over 200 kilometers faster than the T-65 X-Wing, 60 kilometers faster than a TIE fighter, and only 40 slower than its successor, the A-Wing. But there were 2 main trade-offs with this incredible speed. First was deployment time. Due to their compact size, the J-44 engines and unusually small reactor tanks would need to be refueled every 5 hours. Similarly, the fighter's small size limited its life support systems, limiting it to only storing 5 hours worth of airtime. Another trade-off was that, unlike most starfighters of the time, the Delta 7 had no built-in hyperdrive. To get around this, each one had a Sleer 31 hyperspace ring that the Delta 7 could dock with when the pilot needed to leave the system. This actually helped compensate for the fighter's limited range, because when it was docked, it also refueled those sublight engines and refreshed its air supply. With the hyperspace ring, the Delta 7 had an impressive Class 1 hyperspace rating, equal to most other starfighters like the X-Wing, but even faster than most capital ships, with the Class 2 being on most CIS and Imperial Star Destroyers. The Delta 7 was designed and built when the galaxy was still at peace, and as such sported the diplomatic burgundy red paint color, which symbolized diplomatic immunity, and is seen on a lot of official Republic ships like the Consular class cruiser. And for defense, it featured a Surplex J4 deflector generator, but as seen with Obi-Wan's dogfight with Jango Fett's Slave 1, it could not take many hits. The fighter was armed with a pair of Tameco SDS-85 dual laser cannons, but it was never really intended to participate in heavy combat, just your occasional space battle with local pirates. And for those early years of deployment, that was more than enough. Replacing its predecessor model, the Delta VI, it would enter into service at least as early as 32 BBY. Qui-Gon would take his personal blue version on a mission to discover how to retain his consciousness after death. Yoda was also seen to have a customized, smaller version that he could fly on his mission to Vragadar. 4 years later, Master Depa Billaba would use her Delta VII to escort and defend a relief mission from some pirates. By 27 BBY, Obi-Wan Kenobi had enough experience flying these things that he transitioned to the two-pilot civilian model, the Delta 12 Sky Sprite, a ship that he and Anakin flew to the Outbound Flight Project before being recalled. Master Saesee Tiin, one of the Order's premier pilots, was unsatisfied with the standard Delta VII's already impressive capabilities, so he customized two to his own specifications. He installed 4 additional quad-pulse laser cannons behind a pair of breakaway panels in order to provide an increase in its firepower when entering flight mode. He also managed to fit a Class 3 hyperdrive into its frame, but as this was as slow as a Gazanti-class cruiser, he would still prefer the hyperdrive ring when he was in a hurry. Jedi Master Adi Gallia would test flight one of these modified Delta VIIs when fighting Captain Kavik Toth.
Nice work, Master Gallia. The prototype is quite effective.
And I was only flying at half speed.
Due to its successful performance, the remainder of these fighters in the Jedi fleet were modified to Saesee Tiin standards. A full demonstration of the Delta VII's capabilities and limitations will be seen when it was used by Obi-Wan to investigate the assassination attempts on Senator Amidala. The fighter was able to go from Coruscant to the far-off Camino, but would fall short in combat over Geonosis. Despite its speed and maneuverability, and the pilot's strong connection to the Force, Jango's Slave One kept close and managed to blast through the Starfighter's shields. Kenobi only managed to survive by releasing the ship's spare parts like chaff, intercepting the missiles and faking his death while he hid out in the asteroid belt. Early into the Clone Wars, it was determined that the original Delta VII, developed and intended to serve in peacetime, would be phased out of use by the Jedi. Taking the lessons learned over a decade, Kuat Systems Engineering would develop the upgraded Delta 7B. The primary distinction between the two was that the newer 7B featured a centered droid socket, allowing it to fit a full-sized astromech unit. Any other distinctions were kept confidential by the Republic, but it may have been inspired by Anakin's Azure Angel, a ridiculously upgraded Delta 7. Not all Jedi would choose to upgrade to the 7B, or even later Eta 2. As we see, Master Plo Koon would be flying his personal blue and white Delta 7 during the capture of Cato Neimoidia, where he was shot down by his wingmen during Order 66. Delta 7s would be a rare sight in the galaxy after the Clone Wars, but some were acquired and refitted for use by the Rebel Alliance. Wedge Antilles would notably find and repair an abandoned one on Geonosis after his X-Wing was shot down during the retreat from Hoth. Proving just how accurate and durable the fighter's design was, even 30 years later, Antilles was able to use it to take out several squadrons of TIE fighters, TIE bombers, and TIE interceptors. And through some really genius plot engineering, they even found room for a ton of Void 7 seismic charges, capable of taking out Imperial escort carriers. Antilles was able to find a still operational hyperdrive ring, and would take this fighter to rejoin the Rebel fleet. The Delta 7's design and concept would have such an impact that it would influence a ton of later Starfighter designs. The concept of a small, lightly equipped fighter would go on to inspire the Republic V-Wing, which actually is the inspiration for the TIE Fighter series. While Explicix would deliberately base the layout of the A-Wing on the Delta 7, which we can really appreciate if we take a look under the panels. Like on the A-Wing, the Delta 7 had the fighter's shield generator and its accompanying radiator directly behind the cockpit, providing maximum protection for the pilot and life support systems just in front of it. Moving forward, we can see that the Delta 7 had deflector shield power hubs positioned along its length, which let the pilot angle the deflectors as needed, just like the later A-Wing. The peacetime Delta 7 didn't have the sophisticated sensor jamming equipment found on the A-Wing, but it did have a whole suite of advanced sensor and communication equipment up in the nose that was powerful enough to send a clear, real-time transmission from Camino all the way to Coruscant. Working back, we can see that the main reactor was tied directly to the ship's set of dual laser cannons, but the use of hoses to supply Tabana gas shows that these were still standard plasma bolt weapons, not the more advanced pure laser weapons found on the later RZ-2 A-Wing. Few details are provided about the engine systems, but we do see that they have this electromagnetic nozzle built into them, which allows for some thrust vectoring. So that's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Originally, it was designed to be a stormtrooper fighter and used during the Battle of Geonosis, and the wedge shape was meant to foreshadow the design of the Star Destroyers. And there's an error in episode 2, where inside of the cockpit we see that the display screens are using the Star Wars 76 script, not Arabesh. Additional information comes from Star Wars Complete Cross-Sections, the art of episode 2, and the Clone Wars campaign guide. But most important of all, remember, flying is for droids, and the Force will be with you, always.